Elementor have opted for a major rebrand with the release of version 3.35. The first big change we see is in the rebrand of the website. If you take a look at the logo at the top left on the website, that is elementor.com website, you see that the logo has been updated. Some people like it, some people are still trying to get used to it. Let me know your thoughts about the logo in the comments. Do you like it? Do you hate it? Let me know. The second thing we see is that the branding and the messaging has changed a little bit. Previously, it was more focused on you can do it yourself, DIY kind of thing. But now they've changed their messaging a little bit to say the most powerful website builder. Who is it? It is you. It is not the tool. The tool does not make the man. It's the man that makes himself ever a professional or not. There's also some changes that they're trying to be more accessible. So they've added some pause animation. For every animation that we see on the page, there's a pause button. So any animation you see, there's a pause button. And if you put reduce motion, I think everything is supposed to stop. I'm not sure. I've not tested it out, but everything on the page is supposed to stop. The other thing that has been changed is in their pricing structure. And there's been a lot of confusion about the prices. If you go over to the pricing page, you see that they've now changed the plan. Previously, things were a bit chaotic. We had Elementor Pro, AI, Image Optimizer, we had Site Planner, we had Send, and so many other different ones. So they've decided that going in the same direction as other page builders like GeneratePress One and some other ones, they now have an all-in-one package, which they then call Elementor One. So rather than having separate subscriptions, you now pay for one subscription and you get access to everything. But if you are an existing customer, don't be worried. You can still stay with your existing plan. As long as you don't cancel your subscription, that plan will remain. But if you're a new user, they're trying to encourage everybody to go into this Elementor One plan. And they've now made it into two separate sections. The first one is, are you building for yourself or are you building for clients? If you're building for yourself, you have three plans. The first plan is Essential, which I probably would not go for. I'll probably just use the free Elementor rather than paying for the Elementor Essential. But we also have Advanced Solo and Elementor One, which gives you some credits for your AI and Image Optimizer and things like that. If you are building for clients, they've now reintroduced another plan, which is the One Agency, and that gives you unlimited sites. But I think right now, if you are on the very legacy plan, you get 1,000 sites. If you are on the recent legacy plan, you get about 25 sites for the agency plan. But now they've made it to be unlimited sites to compete with the other competitors. So now let me know what you think about the pricing in the comments. Is it too expensive? Is it affordable? Just let me know in the comments. Now let's go into the editor and see what has been added into Elementor version 3.35 editor. The first big change we see is that we now have a unified Elementor menu in the WordPress admin. Let's go ahead and check our WordPress admin out. So here we are in the WordPress dashboard. If you now see, we now have only one icon for Elementor. Everything has now been packed into the Elementor menu, and then everything is a sub-menu. So previously we'd have had Elementor, then we'll have had something like the templates and other things which are broken down into different positions. But now everything has been joined together into the Elementor menu. And then we now have Home, Editor, Theme Builder, and our form submissions. If you go over to Elementor Home, depending on whether you are an Elementor Pro user or Elementor One user, you get to see a different dashboard. But here you get to see the dashboard and then they introduce you to Elementor. But most of the things are still the same. It's still the same functionalities that are there, whether you're an Elementor One user or Elementor Pro user. The only thing is that the Elementor One gives you access to all of the different plugins in one unified dashboard. So you have the editor, which is what we're used to. If you go to the settings of the editor, you get to see your standard settings. Remember to disable the default colors and default fonts. You don't need those. Then if you go under version 4, you get to activate your editor v4. So you can get to experience the editor v4, which they've now said is ready for production use. So now we can use it in our sites reliably. The idea is that if you are only going to be using the version 4 elements without any extra add-on, then it is safe for you to use it because they've already made the base structure stable, so there will be no breaking changes, hopefully. All that will be done is that they'll be adding new features to the already existing features. So nothing will break, just new features to be added, new elements to be added, and so on. But if you are heavily reliant on third-party plugins, such as maybe the dynamic content for Elementor, or maybe the jet elements and things like that, then you might want to wait a bit until the full version has been released and they've released the API for those third-party developers to hook into to create compatibility with Editor V4. If you're building some simple sites which don't require any of those third-party add-ons, then feel free and use Editor V4. That's what they're trying to say there. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Do you agree with that or not? So now that we're done talking about the external things that have been added to the editor, let's now see the internal things with Editor V4 itself specifically. So we're going to be checking out inline editing for heading and paragraph elements, because I know there was this complaint that we had previously that we couldn't style a line of text within the heading. For example, let's go over to the Elementor editor. Here we have the paragraph element. Previously, we could just go over in other widgets and say maybe we want one line of text to be a strong tag. But right now, with the Editor V4 elements, they are sanitized and escaped, so we tend to not see these elements being rendered. So if you try to put in an inline tag, it will not get rendered. But thankfully now, we can add some few stylings, and hopefully they will expand upon it in the future. Similar to how you write in Gutenberg or in the classic editor, you can come inline in the preview area and highlight the text you want to make bold or italic or anything. So let's say, for example, I want to make placeholder to be emboldened. So I'll just double click. I've highlighted that placeholder, and you can see a new toolbar that will appear at the top. And we can now apply any tool we want. So we can say we want it to be bold. That's now bold. Let's apply for maybe don't be. We'll make that to be italic and so on. So you can apply multiple styles directly in line. You will not be able to do it in the text editor area, but in the preview, you can apply any style you want. So thank you, Elementor, for doing that. So I think in the future, they might add other tools like being able to add a span tag so that we can be able to style it with custom CSS or other things like that. The other thing we have been added is the hover styling now automatically applies to focus visible for improved accessibility. This one, I'll put a question mark on it because I think some accessibility experts don't agree with doing this kind of styling, but let's see what they mean in the editor. So here we are back in the editor. Let's say we have our button now. This is our button. And what we want to do is we want to apply some hover style. As you can see, I've already applied the hover style. How do we do that? We go over to the button itself. You can apply a class name or apply it locally. Click on the three dots and we click on hover. So now that we're on hover, we can go over and apply some hover styles. So let's change the background color to something like red. So now when I hover, the color changes to red, or let me just make it something less in your face, so something purplish. So we get our new color. If I publish and preview it on the front end, we get, let's go ahead and refresh. We get our hover style. So what has been added now is that, you know, hover is for your mouse users. So when you're using your mouse to go over an element, that's when you're hovering over the element. But for keyboard users, they don't have that mouse with them. So some people who cannot rely on the mouse, people who use assistive technology, people who prefer to use keyboards and things like that, they don't have the benefit of using a mouse to hover over anything. They rely on keyboards. And I don't know if you've noticed, when you're using your tab key, you get to see that rectangular shape that goes over links that some people don't like. But that rectangular shape, as you can see over the home, is there for a reason. is there to make people see visually where their focus is on. If I press the tab key, it keeps moving through elements that can be clicked on. So elements that I can click on, I should be able to also use a keyboard to interact with it. So that's why it's now giving us a kind of indicator to say, oh yeah, this element is what you are now having your focus on. So what Elementor have done now is that when you put in hover styles, it applies to this focus style. So if I press tab key now, I will be on the button. And you can see the button color changes to the hover style. So some people like this. I prefer not to do that. I prefer that the hover style should be different from the focus style. But that is up to you. If you need it, because at least it's better than nothing. Because I think you can also still style the focus state if you want. If you go back to the editor, there is also the option. If you click on the element, you can see there is also a focus state. So you can actually style the focus state if I want to style it particularly different. So nothing shows up in the editor until I publish. And I go ahead and preview on the front end. Let's go ahead and refresh. And the page has been refreshed. If I use the keyboard now and I tab, you see that I get the red color. So you can actually style the focus state. But by default, if you don't have a focus style, then the hover style will apply to the focus style for accessibility updates. So yeah, that's it. Then the next thing that was added is that we now have dynamic tag support that has been added to the color picker controls. Let's see an example. So imagine here I created an options page using MetaBox called brand, and within that options page, I have created two custom fields. One is called brand primary and the other is called brand secondary. So let's say you're trying to create your brand colors that you want your users to be able to edit outside of the page builder. So you can now create it here, and then they can use it in the editor they do want, because you don't want to give them access to the editor. So now I've created a brand primary and brand secondary. Let's see if we can apply it in editor v4. So I'll go back to my editor and let's choose maybe the some books as the title. I want to apply that brand primary color. So I choose my local, I go to typography, and under colors, if you hover over the colors, you now see a new option at the top for the dynamic tags. So not just variables, but also dynamic tags. And I choose my dynamic tag, and I can search for my meta box field from the options page, which is under site. And I can now go ahead and click on the settings icon. What do you think about this UI with having to first click on your dynamic tag, then go ahead and click on settings before you can change your value? I don't know. It feels like there's too many clicks added, but maybe that's just me. So let's see, brand primary. And we now get our primary color applied. If I choose the other one, brand secondary, we get our secondary color applied. So you can choose any one you want. Let's go back to brand primary. Let's look at an example of an old widget with the heading, just to show you why I am a bit not liking the new UI a bit. Because with the old UI, I can go ahead and click on dynamic tag, and let's say I choose the site metabox field. You see immediately it pops up on the sub field that I need to select. So I want to now select my brand primary, and immediately gives me. Whereas now with the new way of doing it, first I hover just so I can see the dynamic tag icon. So I click on that. Then I click on meta field. Nothing happens. And I have to go back and click on settings before I choose my actual setting, which is the brand primary. And that applies. If I go publish and preview on the front end, you see that the color was applied well. So that means we can now use dynamic tags. But I just hope that Elementor can make some improvements to the UI. First, the gray colors are a bit harder to see sometimes when they are so grayed out. Maybe that's just my perspective. And then the other extra clicks that we have to always do some extra clicks. I think those should be improved a little bit. But that's it for the other option of the dynamic tag support. They've now also improved the size variables with custom units across relevant controls. So Now you can use size variables almost everywhere, and you can also apply custom units and size variables to border radiuses and so on. Let's see an example. So for example, let's go ahead and add a new button element. So I'll say button. To know the version 4 elements is the one that has this atomic sign on it. If I click on that, that's my button element from version 4. Can I go over to style and let's style it on the local level. Then I'll go over to something like border and the border radius. So first you can pick from your units. If you want to use custom units, you can use the FX for custom units. But you also now have access to variables. This 3 circular icon is the variables. So I click on that. I can now pick my variable. I've already gone ahead and pre-populated with some variables. So you would use your own design system to create your variables. But now I can search for my radius and say maybe any of them. And we get our curved radius. And that's it, yeah. So we can now apply the custom variables with custom unit sizes across different elements, even to our font sizes. So let's go to typography and the font size, same thing. I can now use my custom unit variable here and say maybe text M or something big. So I get the big one and you can see the button gets bigger. So I can use my clamp functions and so on in my custom units. And speaking about custom units, one thing I found out that is probably a bug, but at least it works, is if you ever want to apply some colors, which is not the default standard, because the default standard for colors is, if you go over to background and I choose my color, you see we have just hex, RGB, and HSL. You can't just go in and add anything you want. So like, let's say I want to have red. It will apply, but the moment I click away, it returns back to the default color because you can't add custom units in the color variables. But I found a workaround you can use for now. The first one, which you may have noticed, is using the meta fields that will allow you to add custom units like OKLCH, but you can also create custom variables and apply that there. So I'll go over to my variables and variable manager. I'll choose to create a new color variable and say this is test color. Then first, you make sure that a color has been created. Then now you can now go ahead and double click to start editing that color. And now you can put in any color you want. So I can now say I want it to be hot pink and see it applies well. So you can apply custom units to your colors, but if you try to pick it from the color picker, it will not allow you to apply custom units. But within this variable manager, you can apply custom units. So that's the workaround I found. So now I have my text color. I'll save, make sure it's saved. Then maybe I'll probably refresh the page just to be safe. So let's go ahead and save so that we are sure it is saved in the database and we are retrieving from the database. Okay, so now I can go back to my button and pick from my variables my color. And I get my hot pink color applied correctly. So that's one way you can use color. So now you can use any kind of unit. So even modern units like OKLCH, you first create it as a variable, then you edit the variable in the variables manager and you can put in any value you want. They'll let us know in the comments if this is a bug or a feature. Yeah. At least, thankfully, it works. And the final thing, which is the very important thing that I really like, is that we now have access to components. Some people might be wondering, what is the purpose of components? Think of components like if you've ever used your section templates or your global widgets. Back then, those were like the first variation. Then you could create your section template and use it anywhere, but you couldn't edit the content. If you try to edit the content, then it has to unlink from the parent component. But now they've made it better with components that you can now create a component and then use it as multiple instances, and then you can decide if you want some part of the text to be overwritten. So for example, you might create a component for your card, which is the most common use case. You create a card component, and then you want only probably the image and the text and the link to be changed. You don't want any other thing to be changed. The styling should remain the same. Some other random texts and labels should remain the same, but just only a few text, image, and link can be changed. Now you can do that with components. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have this simple layer that I created. Basically, it's simple. It's just a flex box, an image, and our CTA, which is also just a div block with an icon and a paragraph text. So we've created our single element that we are happy with. So now the idea is that we want to be able to reuse this same structure in multiple places with the possibility to change what is the button text, the button link, and the image. Or let's say we don't want to change the button text, only the link and the image. You can do that. So how do we do that? First, to create a component, we'll go over to the wrapper, div, or flexbox. Make sure that there are only version 4 atomic elements inside of your wrapper. If there are any other type of elements inside of the wrapper that is not version 4, like a third-party element or a version 3 element, you will not be able to save it as a component because it doesn't have the key infrastructure to be used as a component. So now we have these. So I can now right-click, and you now see create component. So I'll create component and give it a name. So maybe book cover card. Then I'll say create. What I will do now is it will save it as a component in the database, and it will open an edit page for us, which basically will just create like an overlay. So we can still see in the context of the page what we are editing. So we're editing just this layer in the context of the page. So now I can now go ahead and style it however I want. So I can say, okay, I want the button background. Let's change a bit. Let me get rid of some of the styling. So I'll go ahead and maybe on the local level, I can change some things. Like the color should be black, something like that. So this is now how I want my layout to be. So the next thing I want to do is now determine what properties do I want to be exposed to the user so that the user can edit those properties. So some of the properties I want to expose are probably the image. If you hover over the image label, you'll see there's a new icon just right in front of the label that now tells you to override property. So I can now click on that and give it a name. So I can call that media. For now, it's just going to be default. Let's go ahead and create. So we have our first property. Then let's go ahead and link our second property. Second property is going to be the text. We want to be able to change the text. So for that, I'll go again and do the same thing. You see the icon just after the label. I want to change the title. So that will be like CTA text, create. And finally, let's say I want to change the link. So I'll go to my CTA and under the general, the link, click on that icon and say CTA link or URL, whatever you want. So now we've set up our component. If I'm happy with it, I can now go ahead and publish. And then I'll just go back. So now we've basically created our component. If you want to access the component later on another page or on the same page, I can now go over to the plus icon. Then there's the tab called components, and now select the component that I created, which is the book cover card. And you see it is immediately applied. I applied some defaults, which are the default image, the default text. If you want to get rid of those, you can just go back and edit the component, delete the default text, the default image, and those will be removed. But now I've just left this default because I like it this way. If I want to change the image, same way, you can see all of the settings are there. Just the three options that we exposed, which are the media, we exposed the CTA text, and the CTA link. So the media, you can say I want to change it. The CTA text, instead of buy now, maybe it's going to be learn more. And the link, I can change the link to something else, maybe search for home. and I get my home. And now it will be linked to the home page, and that's it. So I can publish, and yeah, that's about it. So that's how we can create components. So you see, the first component is looking different from the second component. And let's say down the line, maybe in a month's time or a year's time, I feel like, oh no, I don't want all my buttons to have this icon. I want my buttons to have a different icon. Okay, all you do is go over to your components, any of the components. At the top left of your element edit screen, you see a pencil icon. And now I can go ahead and change it. So you can say, okay, for the image, or no, the icon, I want to be able to change the icon to something else, or select SVG, and I want it to be this food utensil icons. Okay, publish. And when I go back now, and let's say maybe the default text should not be buy now, but rent now. So anyone that's using the default text will now be switched to rent now. But the ones that are using text that have been overwritten, they'll be saying whatever the new name is. So let's go ahead and publish, and I will exit. Now you see it's saying rent now, because if you go into the property, I didn't change the property. So that's why it's saying rent now. That's the default that was there. Whereas for the others, it's showing learn more. But you see the icon has changed. The icon is now the food icon there, the food icon here. And that's how it is perfect and good. And it just works. So that's it for components and all the new features that have been added. Let me know in the comments, what is your favorite feature? I think Elementor are going in the right direction. They are making tons of improvements. Let me know what you think. Do you think Editor V4 is ready for production use? I know there are a few bugs which people like Jeffrey from Lightbox and WP Thoughts, Paul, and so many others have pointed out here and there. But I think generally Elementor is getting better. Let me know what you think and which new features do you want Elementor to add to their Editor V4. I know now they've added some few elements like the tab atomic elements and so many other new atomic elements, and they'll be adding more as time goes on. So let us know in the comments, what are your thoughts? Until next time, keep designing, and I'll see you in the next one.